Hi, everybody. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Hi, everyone. It's Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. It's Resistance Live. As you all know, it is Friday, the 13th of October, and let me just adjust my camera here for 1 minute. I am like everybody else, like really overwhelmed today. And one of the things that I thought would be really helpful would be to come on here and just give some legal context to what's happening in the immediate moment. Before I do that, as always, this is Resistance Live, and I'm Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin, also known as ECM. I'm coming to you, as always, from occupied Tongva land here in Southern California. Today, I'm wearing a black jacket over a white ribbed shell for our visually disabled viewers. My hair is pulled back. I have gold hoop earrings in. I am a dirty blonde, pink-skinned, green-eyed woman. Welcome to all. And my pronouns are she, her. Oh, wow. Okay, so we have, I usually do this, but we have Scotland here, Thailand. I know we've got the UK here already because I've seen you, Toluca Lake in Los Angeles, Connecticut, Southern California, Hickory, all over the place, Washington State. I see you all. Welcome. Thanks for being here. Okay, so man, this is really hard. Okay, I have to start by explaining something just about my own legal background, which I don't talk about very often on the broadcast because so often in the last almost 7 years that we've been doing this, we've been focused so much on white collar criminal activity. And while the money-making part of my practice as a lawyer was focused almost exclusively on things like securities fraud and antitrust violations and products liability and what are called adversary proceedings in bankruptcy, which included, by the way, the third Trump bankruptcy for the Atlantic City casinos, where I represented people he owed money to. That all has been very helpful and informative in all the work that we've done here over the last number of years on the liability that Trump might be facing. And that combined with work I did on the Hill and, my legal education in Washington, D.C., and all sorts of other things related to this, joint collaborative efforts on various policy making and my history as an activist, that's all like really informed what I've talked about here. What I have not talked about very much, however, is all the pro bono human rights litigation that I did over the course of 10 years while I was a lawyer. And I think the reason why I have not talked about that very much is because well, for a variety of reasons. I mean, I talked about it a bit in the context of family separation when the Trump administration was separating infants and toddlers and children from their families at the southern border. I have not talked about in depth, like the nature of the work that I did there. And I think part of the reason why I have not talked about it in depth very often, if at all, has been because of the way that it marked me. And I chose to do that work. I volunteered for it. It was all pro bono. And the work that I did was in conjunction with a number of different human rights cases. I did work related to the slave labor allegations in the Holocaust, particularly against Volkswagen and others. And I also did work related to, as many of you know, what was euphemistically referred to as the comfort women case, which is the circumstances in which hundreds of thousands of young women and girls were rounded up by the Japanese military from various territories like Korea, like the Philippines, like outlying islands, in some instances, even from parts of Australia, and were taken from their homes, stolen from the town squares where they lived, rounded up at schools, and forcibly relocated into camps where they were forced to serve. And I should give a trigger warning for all of this. I'm sorry. They were forced to serve as sex slaves to the Japanese military for the duration of the war. And after the war, in some instances, to American soldiers who had been on site. Through that work, I have not only do I have a really deep familiarity with international law and the laws of war and the International Criminal Code with regard to the International Criminal Court, and also all the conditions that are defined as genocide by the UN. but I've also read and seen things through that work and that litigation that that I wouldn't want anybody to see or read or witness. Part of my work, particularly in the Comfort Women case, involved going into the National Archives in Washington, D.C. and pulling records of the testimonies of victims. And I have to say that I can't view what is happening in Gaza outside of that background and that knowledge and that awareness. And so I want to just make really clear here that what I'm going to talk about today is really about the international law and the human, and I'll talk about other things too. Don't worry, we're getting to domestic events as well. But I want to talk a little bit about human rights law internationally so that everybody understands the context for what is happening and why it is what it is. All right. And, again, you all know, sometimes longtime followers know that every once in a while I put on my old law professor hat. Lots of you know that I was an adjunct professor at Columbia Law School for 2 years. Every once in a while I put on that hat and I try to teach in layperson's language so you all kind of get it. So I'm going to do that for a few minutes today so everybody understands. And I am talking about this through a lens that is very emotional and difficult for me to talk about through for a variety of reasons, including current events. And so I just ask everyone, please listen today with as much of an open heart as you can muster, because it is really important for us to understand the nature of what is happening and to understand the complexity of it. All right. So for those who aren't aware, yesterday, the Israeli Defense Forces ordered the northern part of Gaza to completely evacuate. This is a tiny amount of space that houses 1.1 million people, 50% of whom are children. It is and they ordered all civilians to evacuate within 24 hours. That is essentially like ordering the city of Dallas to disappear. Everybody in Dallas to just leave within 24 hours. Not to mention that this is in a territory where now all water and food has been cut off. Where the hospitals are already overwhelmed with victims. Most of the hospitals in Gaza are located in this northern territory, and there is nowhere for these people to go. Egypt has not opened the border for Palestinians to evacuate. The roads have been bombed into oblivion. Most of these people do not have the capacity to drive. And I can't reiterate enough that these are families and civilians and elderly and disabled people and ill people and people who have been injured, who are being told to get out or essentially face mass death. And the United Nations said almost instantly, as soon as the IDF announced this, and they dropped leaflets all over northern Gaza, telling people to get out, that it was impossible and that it was a grave humanitarian crisis to ask civilians to evacuate on 24 hours notice in these conditions with nowhere to go and no means of housing or food or water or anything else. And the hospitals are collapsing. That is correct, Melissa. And essentially, this is anticipated to be in advance of a massive ground invasion by Israel into northern Gaza. Okay, so with those facts known, and the UN already raising concerns and many other people raising concerns, including various human rights organizations. Human Rights Watch is out talking about it this morning. I want to read some things to you guys, from the law. All right. So first of all, I want people to understand the term forcible transfer. And forcible transfer is an element of genocide. Okay. And it is also a war crime. All right. So here's how forcible transfer is defined. Forcible transfer describes the forced relocation of civilian populations as a part of an organized offensive against that population. It is a crime against humanity punishable by the International Criminal Court. And so with that in mind, it's also a part of the Geneva Convention, which we're going to get to in a minute. Okay. So the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide is a United Nations convention. All right. And Israel is a signatory to this convention. They signed on to it in 1949. Article 2 of the convention defines genocide. And it says, in the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. And there are various forms of this: killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. And then C, which is the one that is the most relevant to today's discussion, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. So, these are international laws to which the member states are signatories and have agreed to. All right. And I have to mention that as well. I want to say this is an initial matter. I said this morning on Threads, and it bears repeating. What Hamas did here is unjustifiable. It's horrific. Okay. I don't want anybody to be, misled by anything that I'm saying here today. And the actions that are being taken right now by Israel in relation to the Gaza Strip and in relation to civilians in particular in the Gaza Strip are violations of international law. They are war crimes, and they meet the definition of genocide. All right. So that brings me to the Geneva Convention. And we're going to talk about the International Criminal Court in a minute because there's been a development on this. All right. So there are various laws of war that have been agreed to by the international community. And they are agreed upon under the 1949 Geneva Convention. Okay. And here are these. I'm going to read you some of them just so we know where we are. Okay. The laws of war, which is what the Geneva Convention stands for, forbid collective punishment of a population. Okay. That means that you are not allowed to go in and bomb civilians and murder civilians en masse because a group of militants has undertaken horrific acts. All right. At their most basic level, the laws of war say that warring parties must distinguish between combatants and civilians, preserve civilian infrastructure such as homes, schools, and hospitals, give prior warnings of attacks if civilians are present in targeted locations. But I'm going to remind you, that's not what's happening here. Okay, what's happening is forced transfer, which is very different. Refrain from harming medical staff and depriving medical facilities of electricity and water. Allow the passage of impartial humanitarian aid. And leave civilians and captured combatants unharmed. Murder, cruel treatment, torture, and the taking of hostages are forbidden. All right, now, again, I have to repeat what I just said. What Hamas did is unjustifiable. Please, again, do not mistake anything that I am saying. What Israel has undertaken, however, with regard to Gaza overnight, violates the International Criminal Code and the rules of the International Criminal Court. It constitutes forced transfer under the conventions of the United Nations, and it is a violation of the Geneva Convention. All right. So there are lots of people out there this morning saying things on my feed that are like, what do you expect Israel to do? All right. And I have to reiterate, I'm not a diplomat, right? I'm not a military expert, but I have at least more than a passing expertise in human rights law after almost 10 years of litigating international human rights cases. And I said it this morning on Threads, and I'm going to say it here. Israel has a right to defend itself, and simultaneously, it has an obligation under international law to not violate any of these criminal codes. And when what we're talking about is forcing the relocation of 1.1 million people on 24 hours notice on the threat of mass death for what a small sect of terrorists have undertaken in relation to Israel is not only an act of genocide, it's also a war crime. And because people I know come on here and say, but what Hamas did is horrible. Yes, what Hamas did is horrible. And you can't violate international criminal law in response. All right. And I'm not out on a limb here. Okay. There's multiple human rights organizations that are talking about this exact thing this morning. And the International Criminal Court, the prosecutor for the International Criminal Court, came out yesterday and stated that under their determinations of 2014 about the state of Palestine being subject to their jurisdiction, actions that are taken by Hamas and also actions that are taken by Israel in retaliation are subject to International Criminal Court prosecution. So I want people to have a total understanding of where we are. And I'm seeing I'm seeing folks who maybe don't understand this, all right? And I want to give people the benefit of the doubt. I'm seeing folks who maybe do not understand this saying things like, well, they've been given a warning, which is more than what Jewish people at, a music festival got. Okay. I have to explain something. All right. Like, a warning is saying, like, there's going to be a mass invasion coming. All right. A warning is not saying, get out of your homes and never come back, with no way of getting you out until we give you permission to return. Get out. We don't care. 24 hours or you're dead. Okay. That's a very, very different story. All right. Because they're not taking precautions that are saying we're going to protect civilians, right? They're not saying we're going to allow hospitals to have running water. They're not saying like we're making an effort to demarcate between combatants and civilians here. And let me just say one other thing. I know people who have served in the Israeli military, in the Israeli Defense Forces. Okay. I know people who have friends and family in both Israel and Gaza right now. And it has been pointed out to me by these folks that the Israel Defense Forces knows how to go in and do targeted strikes. Okay. They know how to go in and do rescue missions. And what is being warned about here is not that. Okay. So one thing that I said yesterday, and it's worth reiterating here, is that one of the things that one of the reasons why this is so upsetting to me, and it's so upsetting to all of us, right, is that dehumanization is what leads to genocide. All right. And when anyone on either side of any conflict starts referring to the other side as animals, which is something that a very senior official in the Israeli government did yesterday, when you start seeing folks, even here in the United States, claiming that this is what people in Gaza deserve without understanding that Gaza is not Hamas. That there is a big difference between targeting civilians en masse and targeting those who have carried out horrific acts of terrorism and are holding hostages. When people are wishing harm on an entire population of people, we start to have really serious considerations about genocidal acts. And as someone who has borne witness to the barbarism of what human beings can do to one another when they dehumanize a population, all I can say about it this morning, in addition to the legal information that I think everyone needs to know here, is that I have a very, very significant concern about what is coming for Gaza in the next few days. And again, I am not alone in this. I am very afraid of what is going to happen to a population where 50% of the people are under the age of 15. Okay. I am really concerned about what is going to happen to these mothers and grandmothers and elderly. There's footage this morning on Al Jazeera of the attempts that people are making to flee. And it's literally horror on the faces of children like you would not believe. And again, I have to say, I feel like I have to repeat it over and over again. I am not justifying anything that Hamas undertook here. I am not validating any of it. I am not denying Israel the right to defend itself. This is not defense. What is being undertaken right now in Gaza is not defense. And I can say that because of my understanding of international human rights law. And so I want everyone to grasp that when you see people justifying it on both sides, by the way, when you see people justifying it on both sides of this conflict, it is dehumanization, okay? When you see escalation of brutality and horror on top of already horrific events, that is not leading to a solution, all right? And when you look at what is being done here, in the context of the various international human rights codes that I've just read to you, conventions, treaties, international human rights law, you can't see what's going on as a legitimate act of war, okay? And I am with everyone. You know, Dahlia Lithwick was posting on Threads this morning that every mother that she knew was awake this morning, horrified and wondering how we find a better humanity. And I was awake at 4:15 a.m. this morning in exactly the same place. Because I do not see an outcome based on the current trajectory of what is happening there that is going to end in anything other than mass death. And I do not know how it ends. I wish I had better news. I have some hope that international pressure is going to result in a shift in Israel's policy right now with regard to the northern part of Gaza. It is my hope that there will be a rethinking of military strategy here that's not going to involve a ground war that results in executions of civilian populations. I don't know what the outcome is going to be. But what I do know is that this is not going anywhere good. And it is not in any way at this point consistent with the laws of war. So it felt very important to come on here and say that today, and also to reiterate that the International Criminal Court has stated that they have jurisdiction over what's going on. Where that leads at the moment really depends on what happens next. And, you know, I'm going to remind everybody that one of the reasons why people were happy, I guess is the way to put it, that Jack Smith was named the special counsel in relation to Donald Trump was because he was a prosecutor at the International Criminal Court, which is a place where some of the worst crimes that people commit against each other and nation states commit against one another are prosecuted on the globe. So we all know where this is headed, unfortunately. And I just have to say to everyone, like somebody said to me this morning, can we respectfully agree to disagree? And I have to say something about this, all right? The law is what the law is. And the forced relocation of groups of people under threat of mass death is illegal under international law. And there is nothing that says you are allowed to do this because you were the subject of a terrorist attack. There's nothing that says you're allowed to do this because a terrorist sect executed people at a music festival. There's no exceptions to this, okay? And there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. Because if there are exceptions to the laws of war, all humanity is lost. So I really want to invoke in everyone watching today a real self-reflection. If you find yourself in a place where you think that the actions that are being undertaken are justified. Because there are ways to end Hamas and there are ways to return hostages that do not involve what is currently underway. And I think that beyond that, everyone needs to find some compassion and empathy for civilians on every side of this. Because I don't know what to say beyond the fact that this is really not heading anywhere good. Okay. I want to reiterate as well that there are various folks in our government out there this morning saying exactly the same thing. People like AOC. Again, there are a lot of reporters talking about this morning. Mehdi Hassan is talking about this at great length. There are a number of Jewish leaders who are out talking about this morning. So there is an understanding across a very broad swath of government and humanity and faith leaders that what is currently being forecasted is not only a violation of international law and a war crime and human rights violations and fundamentally meets the definition of genocide, but also that we need to be able to hold space for multiple things being true at once. And that means, and I also have to reiterate this. Yes, Israel is now confirmed to have used white phosphorus over Gaza. Many of you will remember that when Syria did this on its own population, it was roundly referred to as a crime against humanity in 2019. For those who don't know, white phosphorus starts burning when it comes into contact with oxygen. It causes severe burns on human flesh and lifelong suffering. And Israel has now dropped white phosphorus on Gaza. It's confirmed. The Washington Post is reporting it this morning. So, again, I want everyone to understand that this most recent action is being widely condemned across NGOs, across members of our government, across faith leaders of all kinds. And we do need to really be able to hold space for multiple things being true at once, that the actions of Hamas were terrorism, that they were unjustifiable and inexcusable, that Israel has a right to defend itself, and also that civilian population should not be targeted for forced relocation and mass death. Okay. Moving on, as if that's not like heavy enough. All right. So yesterday, notwithstanding the fact that Steve Scalise had won, apparently, the closed door secret vote by the GOP caucus, he stepped aside from the speakership run. And at the moment where this came across my phone, when I was working on a project for a client, I was like, wait a minute, what? And, he clearly didn't have the votes, but he had more votes than Jim Jordan. And so one of the things that is happening here that is just yet again another layer on international crisis, and yet again another talking point on the absolute chaos that the GOP is in right now, is that we now have the person who lost the caucus vote for speaker as the front runner for Speaker of the House. And this is someone who apparently stormed out of the meeting yesterday after telling Steve Scalise that if Steve Scalise lost a floor vote, he wanted Scalise to endorse him immediately. And when Scalise refused to do that and said, well, I won the closed door vote, Jim Jordan stormed out of the meeting in a huff, like a playground bully. And lest we not forget, Jim Jordan has also been alleged to have been complicit in the sexual abuse of wrestlers at Ohio State, dozens of them, and has yet to face accountability for any of that. This is the front runner for the next Speaker of the House inside the GOP caucus. Various commentators, myself included, have been considering what the way out of this is. All right. And, there are lots of people out there claiming, well, maybe there's some moderate Republican who could be nominated who would seal the deal and get concessions from certain Democrats to vote, blah, blah, blah. Well, let me just tell you something. I don't know how any single candidate is going to get to a majority inside the GOP caucus right now. Nancy Mace is not going to endorse Jim Jordan. Various other people who voted McCarthy out are not endorsing anybody. Right? Various people who voted McCarthy out are only endorsing Jim Jordan and have said they won't endorse anybody else. The people who supported Steve Scalise are not going to endorse Jim Jordan. So it's a mess. It's a whole mess. And meanwhile, over here, the Democrats, all 212 of them, have nominated Hakeem Jeffries to be the next Speaker of the House. And we still only need a tiny handful of Republicans who are sick of this garbage, who are elected from districts that Biden won in 2020, and who need to explain to their constituents why they are doing the right thing and they're done with the chaos, because they're not going to get reelected if they stick with this. We only need a handful of those people to just simply coalesce with the Democrats. And there's a growing campaign on this, and I really want people to be very aware that, the Democrats are now whole bore into the idea of Hakeem Jeffries as the next Speaker of the House. There are memes going around. The DCCC is behind this. We're seeing calls for this from people like Jasmine Crockett and Robert Garcia and the new wave of leadership inside the Democratic Party. And Hakeem Jeffries himself has offered solutions here. I know people are saying all the time, whenever Hakeem Jeffries lately has been saying bipartisan solution, oh, we don't need bipartisanship with the right wing. Okay, fine. But let me just say something. If he's able to negotiate with a handful of Republicans that makes him the next Speaker of the House, that's a really good thing. And, those concessions would, of course, probably include and have to include the end of this rule that Nancy Pelosi had previously banned, that one person can put a vote on the House to remove a speaker. And there might be certain concessions that he would have to make to get their approval, things like committeeships and how that would be assigned and how that would work. But I got to tell you, we're like now a month away, month and 4 days from the federal government shutting down. And we are in the middle of the gravest international crisis that this country has faced since 9/11. And, you know, I got to say, I know everybody who lived through 9/11. You all know I was in Washington, D.C. at the time and got evacuated. And I represented people, families of people who died in the World Trade Center. You know, anybody who lived through it, who was a grown adult who lived through it, knows that what we're living through right now has a lot of the same flavor. And we need leadership in the House of Representatives. We need leadership. And I think there ought to be a solution that gets to some form of stability, because the longer this goes on, the worse it gets for not just the United States, but like the entire planet at this point. And also it's an opportunity for international actors who see American weakness as something to exploit, to engage in additional conduct that I don't even really want to think about. So I'm hopeful that there's going to be some movement on this in the near future. You know, I got to say, we don't have any signs today that there's going to be a vote. And, you know, I think that, as I said yesterday, if you want to do anything today to take action, I urge you to call your representatives and urge them to vote for Hakeem Jeffries. And if you have a Democratic rep, call them and thank them for being in array, for doing the right thing, for trying to reach a solution. Tell them you support what they're doing, that you support Hakeem Jeffries. They need to hear the good stuff too. And, you know, I very much want people to understand that, you know, like this is not a tenable situation. All right. And I got to remind everybody, both Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan are insurrectionists. They voted to overturn the 2020 election. Jim Jordan had conversations with Donald Trump the morning of the insurrection. So, and still we don't know what his testimony was, because he defied a subpoena to testify before the January 6th committee. This is like, none of this is viable. So that's that. All right. Other things that people should be aware of. Okay. All right. Where do I go next? We're on day 10 of the Trump trial in New York State. Yesterday, Alan Weisselberg testified, and there was some very interesting news that came out of that testimony, to the effect that many of you will remember now that Weisselberg has done time in relation to his criminal conduct on behalf of the Trump organization. And one of the things that came with was criminal fines amounting to $2 million. Yesterday, we learned that Weisselberg has an arrangement with Donald Trump to pay him his legal fees to the tune of $2 million, but that the amount isn't payable until after the November 2024 election. And Alan Weisselberg didn't remember relevant evidence related to the allegations that Tish James has made in this case. I think it was more than 60 times on the witness stand. So I just want everybody to understand that the corruption here is so deep and so thick. And, you know, Alan Weisselberg is a 30-year CFO of the Trump organization, you know, had an apartment. There's all sorts of allegations about tax fraud and all sorts of other things that relate to Alan Weisselberg here, but he's in it deep. And, you know, this amount sure looks a lot like a payoff. And you know, the reporting on it has been pointing out that exact fact. So that is an interesting development that has taken place. Now, this morning, there is evidence coming in of documents that apparently were created when Donald Trump and his team at the Trump organization were trying to figure out what to claim as the value of Mar-a-Lago. And included in those documents are newspaper articles of the price at which certain residential property was being listed for sale near Mar-a-Lago. Now, I have to point something out, okay? Mar-a-Lago is not zoned as a residence. And, you know, these may seem like boring, not very sexy details of zoning restrictions in Palm Beach County, all right? But the important factor about this is that the way that you value a property when it is zoned as a social club versus a residence matters tremendously to the valuation of that property itself. And on top of it, as anybody who's ever owned property knows, When an appraisal is being done of property, one of the things that the appraiser looks at is what are called comparables, which are sales of comparable property in proximity to where your house is located. All right. A private residence in Palm Beach County is not comparable to a social club valuation. Moreover, listed prices for sale in a newspaper are not proof of an actual sales price such that a legitimate property evaluator would be able to assess a reasonable value for a property. But what happened inside the Trump organization with Post-it notes and clippings was apparently an off-the-cuff determination of how they were going to value Mar-a-Lago on the financial statements of the Trump organization and Donald Trump's financials based on speculative price listings in a newspaper. So this evidence is very significant to the issue of fraud, and very significant furthermore to the issue of valuation. And I'm also just going to mention that there's additional testimony coming out this morning about the fact that like the valuations changed like 7 or 8 times, and that Trump had review of all of this over time. So the liability evidence that is coming in right now is really substantial. And I don't know, man. Again, I don't know what Judge Engoron's going to do here, but I got to say, this evidence is really like very smoking gun from a position of fraud and civil liability. And we know that the fraud count has already been decided, but damages have not been assessed. Insurance fraud, conspiracy, fraudulent documents counts still have to be decided. And it doesn't look good for him. And it doesn't look good for the organization or for any of the people who are involved in this, including Junior and Eric and Weisselberg and others. So that's ongoing in the midst of all this other chaos. All right. We also had a hearing yesterday in Judge Cannon's courtroom in Florida, in Fort Pierce, Florida, about the issue of conflicts of interest by the attorneys representing Trump and his co-defendants. And issues that had been raised by Jack Smith's team about the fact that those attorneys had on occasion represented witnesses who they're going to have to cross-examine. And what they're trying to do, as I've mentioned now multiple times on the broadcast, is prevent an appeal and an overturning of a conviction on the claim that there was an unremedied conflict of interest by defense counsel. Okay. The way that Judge Cannon handled this is not above board. All right. So I want everybody to understand that, you all remember that there was a situation that was reported on several weeks ago where someone who had had their attorney's fees paid for by Donald Trump was given an opportunity by a court raising a similar issue in their trial about whether or not their representation was effective. And as a part of that hearing, the individual who was being prosecuted was given an independent attorney. And after consulting with the independent attorney, that person changed their testimony because presumably the independent attorney had said, if you're not telling the whole truth here, not only are you going to go to prison, but you can also be prosecuted for perjury. Okay. An attorney who has represented others who have a conflicting interest in a given case is arguably not able to effectively represent the client that they are representing in the current matter. So what courts should do, and this is what happened in that matter, is give the individual an opportunity to consult with independent counsel as a part of that evaluative hearing process. Judge Cannon did not do that. Unlike the other judge, Judge Cannon did not allow, for instance, de Oliveira, who is a co-defendant with Donald Trump in the documents case, to consult with an independent attorney. And in fact, there were questions raised yesterday about whether or not de Oliveira, who is not a native English speaker, even understood what was happening in yesterday's hearing. Now, Cannon has determined that he's waived his right. He's waived his conflict here. I have really serious considerations and concerns about what was reported on this yesterday about whether or not that is going to stand on appeal, because she really did not take the precautions that ordinarily would have been required in this circumstance to make sure that his waiver, quote unquote, was informed and voluntary. And so it is not an ordinary course of events, to say the least. And again, I have to remind everyone here that, federal judges, like every judge, are supposed to approach what they're doing from a fair and impartial place, from a balanced place. We are not seeing that in the conduct of Judge Cannon. And I have to remind everyone that there is no means of removing her from the bench unless she is impeached, which is extremely unlikely. Yes, federal district judges do have a code of ethics that they are supposed to abide by. But, there's not any indication right now. She can be overruled by the Circuit Court of Appeals. But, again, there's not going to be an appeal of this determination in advance of trial. And so it's really not a positive development in the event, for instance, that the de-Oliveira is convicted. I have questions about whether or not that conviction can stand. So it's very concerning. It's very concerning. All right. Another legal development yesterday in relation to Donald Trump was that, and I don't know where this leads, and I honestly think this is kind of like a tiny issue compared to everything else that we're facing down today, but I want everybody to be aware that there was a determination yesterday by a federal court that the non-disclosure agreements that Trump had required all campaign staff to sign for the 2016 election are void and unenforceable. And that now means that the past campaign staffers who challenged this can now tell all about what happened during the time that they worked for the campaign. Now, is this likely to be salacious? Yes. Is it likely to be stoked by the mainstream media to generate outrage? Yes. Does it really have any bearing at the moment, unfortunately, on current events? Unfortunately, no. And that's because we're now 8 years after the fact, and we're in a situation where the horse has left the barn. And it is significant, perhaps, to the future applications of NDAs that the Trump campaign might try to get people to sign now. But do I think that it's going to cause anything other than a sort of salacious silver shiny object to distract from ongoing events? Probably not. But it is an ongoing legal development with regard to Trump. Okay. We did have one victory today. And you guys always know I like to share positive news when I can. There was a ruling by a federal court this morning in Texas. Shout out again to Mark Elias and his incredible team, and to Democracy Docket, because this is one of their cases where a judge, similar to what happened in Alabama, threw out a districting that limited Black voting power in the Galveston area. So we have had a number of victories recently that have stopped racial gerrymandering, ended racial gerrymandering, and required redistricting for purposes of 2024. That is what has happened right now in Galveston. Now, I have to remind everybody, this is probably going to be appealed to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the most, at the moment, conservative Circuit Court of Appeals in the country, and it may thereafter be appealed to the Supreme Court. However, I do expect that it will be fast-tracked because of the implications for 2024. And we have already seen the Supreme Court this week refuse to take up a second challenge to the districting situation in Alabama that now means that there is a second majority Black district in Alabama for 2024. So I'm not expecting that even if the Fifth Circuit does something horrible here, that the Supreme Court is going to allow that to stand. And in fact, I'm going to remind everybody that they can just per curiam reverse it if they disagree with it on the basis of prior precedent. We don't have to have briefing in front of the Supreme Court or anything like that. So I want everybody very much to understand that we continue to have significant wins on voter suppression tactics, on racial gerrymandering, on redistricting that is illegal, and that continues to move the needle in the right direction for 2024. Okay. Somebody asked a question about how everything that's happening on the international stage affects Trump. And I don't really want to spend a lot of time on this, on, armchair psychologizing. That's not even a word. What's going on here, other than to point out that he's made outrageous comments in the last 48 hours that have been roundly condemned by everyone from Democrats to the DeSantis campaign to Mike Pence. Okay. And I also just want to point out that because he is a malignant narcissist, anything that draws attention away from him is something that is going to cause him panic. And so, as we discussed yesterday in the context of extinction bursts and responsive behavior by malignant narcissist with sociopathic tendencies, you can expect that his outrageous comments and behavior and, incitements to violence, and not to mention his mental decline, because yesterday he had to be corrected by a Fox News anchor when he kept saying Obama, 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 when what he was talking about was Joe Biden. I have to just remind everyone that you can expect him to get worse. Okay. And again, I'm going to reiterate everything that I've said here for weeks now. Please do your best to self-regulate, to not take every single thing to level 11. We have a lot of other things going on in the world right now that warrant level 11 outrage without Donald Trump's crazy comments being included in that mess for yourself and the way that you process it. As for what all of this means for us. Okay. So, I'm just going to say a couple of very slim things about this because, again, I have to reiterate, right? I'm not a diplomat. I'm not a military expert. I have a deep understanding of human rights law and international human rights law in particular. I am worried, like everyone else, very, very worried, and upset about ongoing events in Israel and Gaza. And all I want to say is this, all right? It is profoundly important right now that de-escalation be front and center in every diplomatic effort that is undertaken. And I'm going to repeat what someone said very wisely on my Threads feed this morning, which is that what is being said by our government publicly and what may be happening behind the scenes in terms of diplomatic efforts may be two very different things. And my hope here is that diplomacy and cooler heads find a way to de-escalate what is currently being threatened here. Because the other thing that is of real concern here right now is not just the immediate escalation involving Israel and Gaza, but the expansion of this to other nation states in the region. Because that leads to potential outcomes that I just don't even want to consider for the entire international community. And I think, if you're a praying person right now and you are someone who, believes in peace, I would urge you to pray for peace. And I know that many people are going to tell me praying does nothing. Well, prayer and diplomacy, prayer and public pressure, any efforts that you can take, even if you're not a praying person, to take care of yourself, to take care of those you love, to take care of people who are impacted, to take care of those in your family and your friend circle and in your own community who have family members in Palestine and in Israel and in the region. I'm going to remind everybody, in addition to the 1.1 million people who are currently subject to forced relocation in Gaza, there's still 400 Americans there. I want everybody to really do what you need to do to be focused on taking care of yourself and taking care of your community and taking care of impacted people. And please, please, I beg those of you who think that what is happening on either side is in any way justified to find your humanity. All right, that's it for today. As always, it's a Friday. We all know what that means, right? If there's a need for me to do a broadcast later on today, I will make myself available for that. I do want to remind everyone that we do have Progressive Coffee Hour coming up for our Patreon subscribers on Sunday morning at 8:30. I am debating, rather than our usual free-flowing conversation, ask me anything sort of thing, debating just having a conversation about how we cope and how we can regulate through these times, and what the skill sets that we need in trauma response to continue to maintain our humanity and our compassion and our empathy and to keep going. So if you are not yet a paid subscriber over on Patreon and you want to get in on that, our paid subscriptions start at a very low level. They're $2 a month, which is less than 10 cents a broadcast. And you get Progressive Coffee Hour as a part of that. And if you can do more to support this work, please feel free. There's various tiers of subscription over there. But also, please remember to like this broadcast on YouTube, to subscribe here on YouTube for free, to share this broadcast with folks who may need it. And the last thing that I just want to say today, we've got almost 550 people here live right now, is that I want all of us, and I can't say it any better than this, to remember that that peace is the end goal, and it should be the end goal for all of us, like worldwide. Humanity deserves peace and justice, and children deserve to grow up in safety, and they deserve to grow up free. So I'm sending love to all the impacted people in our own community. Again, I know we've got a lot of viewers in this audience who have friends in Israel, family in Israel, friends in Gaza, family in Gaza, and impacted people who are present in the area. I love you all. I am hoping and praying for a positive outcome that doesn't involve more death. And I urge you all to do whatever you need to do at the present time to care for yourselves and the people that you love. All right. I will see you all online, if not live again, depending on developments of today. And I will catch all of our Patreon paid subscribers on Sunday morning at 8:30 Pacific, 11:30 Eastern for Progressive Coffee Hour. And I will see you here on Monday, regular time. All right, everyone, take care of yourselves, and much love to everyone. Please do what you need to do today, by the way, to just, even if you need to log off, to try to find some peace for yourself and the people that you care about. All right. Much love, everyone. I'll see you soon.